We are now going to go into change process theories, the underlying change processes that are always in progress in different ways that we can observe if you know what to look for, but more important, if you understand these four basic processes, you will have a better understanding of what you can do within the organization to manage change, influence change, or enable change in different ways. The phases of change management. Let's talk about the first, what needs to change and what to protect. Always keep in mind that it's not just what is changed, but what you need to protect in order to keep intact the key values that the organization holds dear, as well as what to prevent resistance unnecessarily from occurring. This requires the deep analysis and reflection of the diagnostic models. We then also get into the how things are changed and how you clarify the situation so that everyone understands it, and you identify the appropriate change theory or process. That's the focus we're going to start talking about here. And in turn, that drives the choice of available tools. There's also then the change implementation, which will be handled in a separate course of the actual project methodology to manage a large change process. This is not the small, simple things. The change implementation is a project itself. So we're going to talk about in this particular lecture and the next, the how change happens at the basic level of what drives change or we can harness for change. The theories then, the foundational theories. Each theory has a different mechanism that drives the change. If you know the mechanism, that gives you some insight as to how you can influence the change process. There's also a looping in that a change is not in isolation. One change establishes a foundation for the next change. One change actually alters the environment itself and will actually create other opportunities for change, and that there could be a cascading effect when you get into change. If you understand the processes that are involved, you can anticipate that cascade that might happen so that you can influence it in a way that you desire. We're also talking about the scale. Are we talking about what happens within a single organization, a single department, or a single person? Or are we talking about how it cascades and influences a much larger body of people? And we get into issues such as, can you prescribe it or mandate a particular situation, or do you have to build it and construct it piece by piece as it comes together? In practice, these are not pure change processes. There's four we're going to talk about, and they're generally a mix in that you may employ one as a primary change, but as secondary influences, you may take advantage of what is already in place. So when we get into actual practice, think about this not as a choice of one, but how can you pick different processes so that you can rely on a primary process and secondary change processes to supplement or complement the entire change initiative. The four theories of change. This is an overview. In the next lecture, we're going to get into these four theories in much more detail. First, the planned change goal setting. This is the one that everybody thinks about when you talk about organizational change. This is a separate initiative. It's got its own problem. It's got its own goals and implementation itself. This is a team, and the majority of project change methodologies are really used within applying this particular change theory, in that it is a contained process and it is a constructed process. The second is a debate synthesis, a dialectic, in which case it's an argumental approach in that you bring about change based upon the arguments that you establish. It's the thesis or idea with antithesis, something that opposes it. When you get that conflict of ideas, and again, it's a conflict of ideas that then brings about new ways of thinking, the synthesis. And that synthesis then is the change itself. When you get to the planned change where you need to get people thinking about ideas, this second change process comes into play. Third is a life cycle. Think about this from the biological standpoint. There's birth, childhood, adolescent, adulthood, maturity, and eventually death. This is a life cycle, growth through decline. Same within organizations. Organizations have a life cycle to them. The key point, though, is that organizations can be reborn. We're going to talk about that in the next lecture. The sequence of growth, decline, and regrowth. The fourth also comes from the biological field, and this is the evolution. The adaptation of the organization, or in many cases you might think about a species adaptation. This is an emergence. New things emerge based upon a selection process among competitors. This also has application within organizations as to how change comes about. And again, we're going to get into this much more detail in the next lecture. Up next, the models in detail. Think about what drives change and how can you add these change process models to your toolkit for your change initiatives.